But there's one vegetarian.
Yeah, there's a vegetarian menu at the table. The vegetarians need to
A menu. A
the vegetarian meal is at the each table. Each one set. There's one vegetarian. They will have table.
If you would all take your seats, please.
And just move it up like this.
Oh, very good.
Okay. For this one.
It's open seating, Sam. It's open seating.
And everybody, there's one vegetarian meal per table. So if you're a vegetarian, go for it. Oh yeah.
So once we finish serving all the salads, I'll tell you so you can start with the speech.
Start with the what?
With your remarks. So we need to serve the salad first, and then you start with the remarks.
Oh. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what we were talking with Sam. And
Okay.
so as soon as we place the last salad, I'll go with you.
So when are you going to start putting out the salads?
Well, I need everyone to be seated so I know how many people are seated on each table. Otherwise, it won't be.
I understand.
Yeah. So once I place the last salad, I'll go and tell you where.
Okay.
So you can come and.
Thank you.
I'll leave it on.
So, is your microphone? Ready to go? Okay, thank you so much. Okay. Good evening. Good evening. If I could have your attention for a moment, get rolling on your salads. And first of all, I want to welcome everybody to another chapter in the birthday of George Ellery Hale. And I think you probably have noticed by now that there is a birthday cake in the middle of the room. And that is the 100-inch dome with the number 154 on the top. And so in a little while, as appropriate, we're going to sing happy birthday to George, but in time. I just wanted to introduce a few people and thank a number of people for making this happen. First of all, I'm very excited to have Tom Rosenbaum and his wife, Catherine Faber, join us tonight. Tom is the president of Caltech and is going to offer a few words on GEH and Caltech. And our speaker tonight is going to be Dr. Ed Krupp, the director of Griffith Observatory, who's going to share some thoughts on public astronomy and George Hale's impact on the spread of public astronomy. Unfortunately, tonight, John Mulcahy, the president or the director of the Carnegie Observatories here in Pasadena, couldn't be with us. His aunt up in Monterey died and he had to be with the family, and we'll miss him. This wonderful gathering just would not have happened with so many people who really pitched in and were instrumental in making this what it has been so far and is going to be tomorrow, tonight and tomorrow. First of all, cousins Nikki Hale Shields and Kathleen Cully for all the incredible work they did on the genealogy. Kathleen's this is Kathleen's incredible wheel of the family there. She says, oh, well, I just bought a program. Well, she did buy a program, got it and did it, and that's what counts. And Nikki on the William Brown Hale side of the family for putting together the handout list of the family members going back. So thank you too so much. Liz Mole, Stefanos Palazoidi, whose home we were at today at the Hale Solar Lab, for sharing their home and their friendship in that wonderful, wonderful place that yeah, it's indescribable. And we're going to hear a little bit more about those two later. Bonnie Winings, our wonderful volunteer who does such incredible organization. She absolutely was holding my hand through this whole thing, organizing it, telling me what to do, telling me not what to do, and what we're going to do when. Bonnie, thank you so much. And now I would like the board members of the Mount Wilson Institute to stand up. We have one board member at every table, and I want to tell you that we have just an incredibly hardworking board. There's no just sit on your backside members who show up at an occasional meeting. All of these people are workers for Mount Wilson. Each has a particular task that they've been working on and are accomplishing. And I want to thank you all so much for what you do for Mount Wilson. And quickly to Todd Mason for joining us tonight at the today at the Solar Lab and tonight for dinner. I really learned so much about my family from Todd and Robin. I had an opportunity, for instance, to meet my first cousin, Ann James, Margaret Hale Schur's oldest daughter. I met Sylvia and I went up to Medford, Oregon and spent a couple of days with her. A volcano of information and love and photographs and logs and notes and letters. And then through her, I met so much of that side of the family up there. 3 years ago, I went to give a talk at Yerkes Observatory and just by chance met Nikki and Mark Shields. And they said, I was telling them I was going to be there for a talk at Yerkes on my grandfather. And they said, well, come and stay with us for a week because at the end of that week, we're going to have a celebration of life for Freddie Smith, one of our cousins. So I came and met all these part of the family that I'd never met before. You know, the William E. Hale my father was in Pasadena, you know, and there were 3 boys, my 2 older brothers and myself, and that was it on our side of the family. So to be back there and meet all these people, and I asked, have you been to Mount Wilson before? A number of them said, I think I was there when I was maybe 10 years old with my mom and dad, or, well, I've heard of Mount Wilson, but, or no, I've never been to Los Angeles. And I'm click, click, click. I'm thinking, we've got to get people out here. We've got to get people to see what this thing is all about and what this man really meant. So anyway, it's a little long-winded. My last thank you, and I'm leaving somebody out. I know it. Oh, I know well, exactly who our volunteers. Of course, our board members are volunteers. But one person who has kept this place rolling is the beating heart and soul, and without whom we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today, is our executive director, Tom Meneghetti. Stand up. And lastly, and then we'll move along, the love and support that I have for being involved in this and believing in the mission that we have is my son, Gavin, and my wife, Sylvia. Oh, I now have to acknowledge 2 people who were pivotal in the beginning of the Mount Wilson Institute, which was created roughly 35 years ago when the Carnegie Institution of Science in Washington decided that they were going to take their funding of new telescopes and take it to Chile. And their idea was to close Mount Wilson. Can you believe it? And there were a handful of people who said this cannot happen. 2 of them who were on the board when I joined, Bob Ferguson and Art Vaughn, I learned so much from. These men kept this place going through some dark times. And I am so thrilled tonight. Both of them, Art and Bob, are no longer with us. But tonight, Ann Vaughn is with us, Art's wife. And Art, I love that man. And I'm afraid of him. Yeah. All right. So, on with the program. We are really thrilled and honored to have with us Tom Rosenbaum, who is the president of Caltech. And Tom graciously consented to come and share a few words with us on what he believes about the importance of George Ellery Hale and Caltech. Tom?
Well, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you this evening. I was talking to someone earlier and said that if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's to take advantage of opportunities like this. And we're very pleased that you've chosen Caltech as the place to congregate. George Ellery Hale was a true visionary. And I don't just mean the fact that he opened the world's eyes to the heavens. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight, with your permission, are 3 brief vignettes. One is about the telescopes on Mount Wilson and Mount Palomar, including the 200-inch Hale mirror, the founding of modern-day Caltech, and if we were inside, and if you haven't gone in the main dining room, there's a founder's portrait with Hale, Millikan, and Noyes that hangs proudly in the Athenaeum, and the origins of the National Research Council. So telescopes. It was George Ellery's confidence George Ellery Hale's confidence that the Carnegie Institution would fund a new solar observatory at Mount Wilson that promoted his move from the University of Chicago to Pasadena in 1903. I also moved from the University of Chicago a few years later to Pasadena, and I have a picture in my office from the University of Chicago archives of Hale on the peak of Mount Wilson scouting out the site of the telescope, and I hold that very dear. Hale's move in turn would make possible his dramatic reimagining of what was then True Polytechnic Institute and now the California Institute of Technology, and his role as a national scientific figure. In 1904, the Carnegie Institution authorized $300,000, which was a lot of money in 1904, for the establishment of the Mount Wilson Observatory and appointed Hale as its director. Hale wrote to Andrew Carnegie in 1904, quote, "As the executive committee of the Carnegie Institution has decided to recommend to the trustees the establishment of a solar observatory on Mount Wilson, I take the liberty of sending you certain papers which have a bearing on the proposed work. Since the test of the atmospheric conditions at Mount Wilson extending through nearly a year has shown them to be much superior to those of any other known site, and since the possibilities of the above mentioned instruments are undoubtedly very great, I think the present opportunity for an important advance has not been equaled in astronomy during the past 50 years. And that's the kind of timescale that Hale thought about. Hale, in fact, built the world's largest telescope 4 times over. His 60-inch telescope, then the largest in the world, was not yet completed at Mount Wilson before he determined he would need an instrument with still more light-gathering power to answer the questions that most captivated astronomers. When businessman John Hooker pledged funding for the casting and polishing of a 100-inch glass mirror, Hale wrote to him promising that the telescope would, quote, enormously surpass all existing instruments in the photography of stars and nebulae. Still, its construction was uncertain. You probably all know the story of the mirror, but let me tell it to you briefly. It's a good one. Only one glassmaker, French plate glass companies in Saint-Gobain, France, was willing to try casting a disc of that size. The first attempt, made from a 9,000-pound slab of wine bottle glass, that's very French, was flawed, full of air bubbles and crystals. The glassmaker built a new furnace and slow cooling oven to refine the process, but the next attempts were no better, and World War II then intervened and scotched the rest of the project. At this point, Hale and his colleagues reconsidered the first disc. Over some objections that the effort was pointless and destined to fail, he entrusted the glass to chief optician George Ritchie for grinding and polishing. The glass had to be shaped to within a millionth of an inch or a few millionths of an inch across its diameter, a project that was compelled Ritchie to build a new grinding machine, and it took him 5 years to complete. When the mirror was finally finished, getting it up the narrow, winding toll road to the top of Mount Wilson posed yet another challenge. The glass was transported by truck and mules and men holding on with ropes. On July 1st, 1917, 105 years to today's date. Dozens of men accompanied the mirror and took an average speed of 1 mile per hour, 8 hours to get up the mountain. While some astronomers, including Ritchie, were still in doubt over the quality of the glass, the Hooker telescope was turned toward Jupiter for its first look at the sky on November 1st, 1917. Astronomer Walter Adams described what happened next. The sight appalled us, for instead of a single image, we had 6 or 7 partially overlapping images irregularly spaced and filling much of the eyepiece. The telescope's dome had been left open throughout the day and the mirror had heated. So Hale and Adams resolved to meet at 3 a.m. to try again. They couldn't sleep, so they got there a little earlier. And this time, the telescope revealed a precise image. The rest is history. The 100-inch will remain the largest aperture telescope from 1917 to 1949. That's an amazing statement. And proved to be one of the most significant in observational astronomy. Edwin Hubble used the Hooker telescope to prove that the universe extends beyond the Milky Way galaxy, really changing the place of humanity in the cosmos, and to show that the universe is expanding. Later, Fritz Zwicky's observations will reveal evidence of dark matter. Yet, even with the trauma of building this 100-inch telescope, soon after, Hale envisioned a more powerful instrument. In a 1928 article in Harper's Magazine, he argued, like buried treasures, this is really lyrical, I think, the outposts of the universe have beckoned to the adventurers from immemorial times. Princes and potentates, political or industrial, equally with men of science, have felt the lure of the uncharted seas of space, and through their provision of instrumental means, the sphere of exploration has rapidly widened. Each expedition into remoter space has made new discoveries and brought back permanent additions to our knowledge of the heavens. Hale asked that a copy of the article be sent to the Rockefeller Foundation, which by his design agreed to fund Caltech's 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar. And you should certainly go to Mount Wilson if you've not, but you should also go to Mount Palomar if you've not been there. After a decade of polishing on the Caltech campus and interruption by World War II, first light at Palomar was achieved in 1949. And a remarkable statement, given that it's not very high up, is that Palomar continues to be oversubscribed by a factor of 3 for cutting-edge astronomy. So let me turn briefly, and these are briefer, to history of reinvention, which is the story of Caltech, which Hale has much credit for imagining. Philanthropist and politician Amos G. Troop started the vocational and preparatory school, Troop University, in 1891 to bring liberal and practical educational opportunities to a rapidly growing Southern California. 16 years later, when George Ellery Hale joined Troop's governing board, the region and the school's potential within it had changed. Hale convinced Troop's governing board to seize the opportunity to serve the community and the nation in ways that would dramatically change the school and its mission. Troop's trajectory had been one of expansion in terms of enrollment, campus size, and fields of study. With a new and narrow focus on science and engineering, the Institute abandoned its primary and secondary schools and teachers' college, bringing a student enrollment that had been more than 600 down to 27 students. In 1910, the Journal of American Educational Review reported of the move, quote, "This contraction of numbers in the face of a great expansion of plan is probably the boldest step ever taken by an American educational institution and marks the determination to concentrate resources on the development of an institute of technology that shall rank with the best of the world." And that's what we still try to do here at Caltech. Finally, let me tell you about the national stage. In 1916, the United States officially clung to a policy of neutrality in World War I, as you well know. Nonetheless, Hale was convinced that the country would eventually join the war, and moreover, believed that university and institutional laboratories needed to be organized towards national service. At that year's annual meeting of the National Academy of Sciences, he put forward a successful resolution to put the country's scientific apparatus at President Wilson's disposal through a new body, the National Research Council. The creation of the National Research Council brought science to the forefront of national affairs and continues today to influence policy in the scientific and technological realm. There are few who can claim a legacy as influential and lasting, as you can tell from these vignettes, as George Ellery Hale. You have enormous family accomplishments of which to be proud. Thank you for including us.
Tom, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I want to turn to my son, Gavin Hale, who would like to share a few thoughts on Mount Wilson and what it means to him.
Thank you, Dad. I was not expecting to follow the president of Caltech. I grew up here, a son of Mount Wilson at Caltech. And if you look on this page, you will note that there are very few of us left here on that are Hale. And especially here in Pasadena, that was something that, as an only child, not having any siblings, with whom I could commiserate, that this idea of family was this institution, was this legacy that had come before me, that I was not so subtly reminded of last night at dinner. You have the last name, you must keep this up. And Marion Hale has so kindly offered to continue, oh no, Neely said that she would continue to help fund my pursuit of a boy. So thank you very much, Neely. And so that has very much been an important part of my journey. And Tim Thompson so eloquently put it to all of us today, I think, that this is our DNA. And this is something that we should leave here and take this mandate forth. And that was something that I thought very specifically was my own personal journey. Because I thought, here I am, the last one. And yet I look out here at all of you, folks that I've been so very fortunate to have met over the last 4 years. And it's amazing that suddenly what was perhaps a burden is something that we can all share and shoulder. That there's this great story to be told. And one that doesn't have to be just about us, about this, about this beacon on the hill. Todd Mason spoke about how the story was an inspiration to so many others. And, just last night, Ben James was telling me about how learning, I grew up with this. This was something that was very personal to me that I knew ever since I was this big about this legacy from which I came. And Ben just grew up that George Ellery Hale was a guy who made some telescopes, just from your backyard, only to discover, what this great legacy was and what it meant. And how that anecdote alone and learning and going down this great rabbit hole, how that inspired him to jump off the cliff and go and do great things, to think to make no small plans. And that, I think, is the legacy of George Ellery Hale, of this institution and the one on the Hill. And so I think going forward, that is the mandate I give to all of you, give to all of us, to carry this legacy and for what this institution, the one on the Hill, can mean as an inspiration to others. So thank you very much.
All right, now we have a real treat in store because Rick Thornberry is going to join me on the podium and tell us about a gift that he has brought us in terms of some very wonderful Cabernet wine, which his 14-acre vineyard in Napa has produced. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. And I wrote a script because Sam said I had limited time. So if I don't stay on script, we're in for a long chat. But I wanted to say hello again, relatives. I've met some of you, not all of you, but it's been a very interesting experience, and I hope to continue to meet you if I haven't. At any rate, as Sam said, my name is Richard, but it's Richard, well, he calls me Rick, but it's Richard Paul Thornberry. And I make that a point because not only can you call me Rick, but I'm from the Margaret Hale branch of the family tree. She was George Ellery Hale's daughter. who married Paul Schur, and you've heard of James A.B. Schur as well, who was his dad, and hence my middle name. So I feel honored that I'm named after my grandfather who married Margaret Hale. I'm the son of another Margaret, which is known as Peggy. She's also known as Peggy, or she was known. And that she was the second youngest of the 6 daughters. And she married George Thornberry. And that's why I'm here. Enough about me. Let's talk about the wine. I don't know if you looked at the bottom of your menu, but there was a little note, and they weren't supposed to put my name on that, but they did. At any rate, and I put some handouts on the table because I can't talk for too long. And they'll explain a lot of things. But anyhow, the red wine that's going to be served as we speak after they remove your salad plates will be served for the point of drinking with your entree. It comes from the Cabernet Sauvignon grapes grown in a 14-acre vineyard located in the Napa Valley's Atlas Peak American viticultural area on the west side of the mountain at an elevation between 1,300 and 1,400 feet. In 1999 and 2000, my wife Gail, who couldn't be here because she's planning for a 4th of July party that I'm going to catch up with, she and I developed this vineyard from the raw land on a 64-acre property we purchased in 1985, not long after we moved to Napa. We decided to name it Soda Canyon Ranch Vineyards in honor of the long vacant ranch that had existed there before it was subdivided into 13 parcels. It overlooks the Napa Valley with amazing views to the southwest and north. And Sam and Sylvia have been there, so they can attest to that, right? Beautiful. Our first commercially viable crop was harvested in 2004, and all 30 tons were sold to Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. That was our first winery buyer. It was very exciting. And we've been selling our grapes to them ever since. With the outstanding 2013 vintage, the winemaker decided to make a special limited production bottling of about 400 cases using 100% of our grapes under their winemaker series program. Normally, our grapes are blended with many other growers' grapes that they purchase grapes from and added to their Napa Valley Artemis Cabernet Sauvignon, which you may have seen in a steakhouse like Morton's or Ruth's Chris. In 2014, which is the wine you're going to be drinking, the winemaker decided to elevate their limited production of the wine made from our grapes to that of their distinguished vineyard series that honors those vineyards they buy grapes from that, quote, stand out. In other words, the best of the best, so to speak. That is the wine before you that's now being passed out. The back label on the bottle, and here's what the bottle looks like. That's the typical Stag's Leap Wine Cellar bottle. And then the name Soda Canyon Ranch Vineyards, which is called a single vineyard designate. We're very proud of that. At any rate, the back label is worth reading. There's a health hazard discussion, but there's also other things, all right? Yeah, you can ignore that part. In 2014, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. The back label of the bottle speaks to this and goes on to state, quote, in 2014, we chose Soda Canyon Ranch Vineyards on Atlas Peak, which is on a very steep slope with rocky volcanic soil that gets great exposure to sunlight, yielding small berries that lead to an intense wine with a very distinct personality. This Cabernet is complex with bold tannins and notes of wild sage and huckleberry. Now, a lot of creative writers in the wine business. So and I noticed we had a huckleberry salad dressing. So there you go. You got a little chance to compare. At any rate, we are extremely proud to be selling our Cabernet Sauvignon grapes to Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, the winery that put Napa Valley on the world wine map in 1976 by winning the Tasting of Paris with their 1973 vintage Cabernet Sauvignon made from the grapes grown in their Stag's Leap vineyards, which now you'll see on the label will be labeled as SLV if you're buying their estate. They bested some of the very well-known French Bordeaux at the time. Awesome. That's all I have to say. I left some handouts that give you a little description if you want more information. If you like more, talk to me. But we're very proud of it. We really hope you enjoy it. Enjoy your dinner.
Okay, well, I think I'll leave you alone for a while to have your dinner, and then we'll continue the program shortly. Oh, we want to do one now? Oh! All right. All right. First of all, thank you, Rick. And a toast to who else? George. Thank you. All right.
This year, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter celebrates 13 years of orbit around our moon. This year, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter celebrates 13 years of orbit around our moon. And in that time, it has collected over a petabyte of data, the largest volume ever collected by a planetary science mission at NASA. Due to its success and continued operational abilities, NASA has awarded the spacecraft an additional extended mission phase so that it can continue gathering critical information on the moon and help pave the way for future lunar missions. Going forward, the LRO mission will have 4 main areas of focus. The first is the study of volatiles, which are chemicals that easily evaporate or vaporize, such as water. In terms of lunar exploration, volatiles will be useful for things like creating rocket fuel and making oxygen to breathe, so they are a primary resource that future astronauts will depend on having. LRO will continue to provide new data for identifying which areas are rich in volatiles, and for cluing us in to how they may move around the lunar surface. Current LRO data suggests they may be frozen in permanently shadowed craters, in areas that receive some sunlight, and may be chemically locked in minerals on the moon. This is helping pave the way for future missions like Viper, which will send a robotic rover to explore an area near the lunar South Pole, and ultimately, the astronaut-led Artemis missions. The second area of focus is on the moon's interior, volcanic features, and the tectonics of the moon's surface, because understanding the lunar surface requires knowledge of what's been going on underneath. Scientists want to figure out when the moon was last volcanically active, and how current geologic processes, like moonquakes, could affect the safety of future exploration. They'll do these things by studying lobate scarps, as well as deep crustal and mantle composition that are exposed at the surface. Studying the moon's history of volcanism and tectonics will also inform us about other planetary bodies in our solar system and beyond. The third area of focus is on the moon's surface, its regolith and impact craters. We want to know how impact craters break down, and if different ejected materials might degrade at different rates. These studies will give us a better understanding of the mineral and chemical makeup of the lunar surface and subsurface. This information can tell us how the moon has changed over hundreds of millions or billions of years. Studying the moon's regolith and impact craters also informs scientists about space weathering, which can help similar studies looking at the Earth, as well as on places like Mars, Mercury, or even asteroids. The last focus area for LRO going forward is support for future missions. NASA has plans for numerous missions to go to the lunar surface during LRO's extended phase. Sending missions to the lunar surface requires planning, not only to build the mission, but to find safe and interesting landing sites. LRO is in a unique position to directly assist with some of those operations and science objectives. LRO can help identify landing sites by making maps that tell us what the surface is like, where there may be hazards to landers, and where there are interesting features to explore. LRO is also capable of helping landed missions get simultaneous measurements from orbit while they gather data from the surface. After studying the moon for 13 years, LRO has proven to be one of NASA's most valuable tools for advancing lunar science. And as it continues collecting data, the spacecraft helps lead the way for future exploration of our moon. This year, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter celebrates 13 years of orbit around. This year, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter celebrates 13 years of orbit around our moon. And in that time, it has collected over a petabyte of data, the largest volume ever collected by a planetary science mission at NASA. Due to its success and continued operations,
Alma, in search of our cosmic origins. Located high in the Andes mountain range, the 66 antennas that make up the Atacama large millimeter submillimeter array, ALMA, are an imposing sight. Under one sky, more than 20 countries embark upon a scientific endeavor that can only be realized through collaboration. North America, Europe, East Asia, and Chile work together to answer humankind's fundamental questions. Northern Chile was chosen as the site for ALMA because the Atacama Desert is the driest in the world. Its atmosphere, almost devoid of water vapor, enables detection of some of the faintest signals from the universe. Over 16,500 feet above sea level and covering distances of up to 10 miles of the Chajnantor Plateau, the ALMA antennas work as a single large telescope. A supercomputer combines and synchronizes all of their signals in real time. Thanks to this engineering and scientific feat, we're learning about the cold universe, the secrets of planet formation, and the chemical elements that constitute the building blocks of life. Professionals from around the world work for ALMA, pushing the limits of knowledge every day. In Chile, about 50 staff members are based in Santiago, while another 200 work in shifts at the Operations Support Facility close to the town of San Pedro de Atacama. Most of the staff works in the offices, laboratories, and antenna control room of this facility at an altitude of 9,500 feet. Others ascend to the Chajnantor Plateau at 16,500 feet to maintain and relocate the antennas, among other tasks. Strict safety protocols are crucial under these conditions. Thanks to leisure and residential facilities, staff can lead a healthy lifestyle, playing sports and games, watching movies, enjoying nutritious meals, and resting in comfort. ALMA plays a key role in global astronomical efforts. Along with other radio telescopes, it allowed the first image of a black hole to be captured. Without ALMA, that goal would have been unattainable. The Chilean astronomical community actively participates in ALMA research and discoveries, using its 10% of observing time. The radio telescope also contributes to workforce development and supports national and regional scientific, technological, and outreach projects. An example of the latter are the thousands of visitors who tour the facilities each year. ALMA respects the local Licanantay or Atacameño indigenous culture, supporting educational and other projects in the town of Toconao and San Pedro Atacama, preserving archaeological heritage sites, and protecting the unique flora and fauna of the region, to name a few initiatives. Mirroring the antennas that work in unison with one goal, under the same sky, the international collaboration that ALMA embodies continues the search of our cosmic origins.
Isn't that
Who put
wonderful?
that together?
Kathleen Cully,
Oh, okay.
cousin from New York.
So did you ever have a fear of public speaking?
No.
I was gonna say you conquered it.
Should I have been projecting more?
No, you're
As
doing great.
Bonnie said?
No, you're doing great.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm about to try to sell these people on supporting our vision
Yeah,
going
right.
forward.
Yeah. I've heard a little sneak preview. I won't tell anybody.
All right.
Yeah, no, you just do what you're doing.
All
You're
right.
doing great.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
One unfortunate thing here is there's no light here. Well, I can't read my notes. Oh, fumble around a little bit. If everybody can take the seats, we'll continue the program. I think you might remember last night when we were at Gail's restaurant, and unfortunately Gail couldn't be with us, Gail Cole, the owner, and I told you about her love of the mountain and the support she gave the mountain after the Bobcat fire. And she said that it is the institutions like Mount Wilson, it's the institutions like the Rose Bowl, and it's the institutions, she also mentioned the Griffith Observatory, that are the iconic landmarks of our greater Los Angeles town. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce a great friend of Mount Wilson who runs an institution that was inspired by the work of George Ellery Hale. And if anybody pushes the forefront of scientific and astronomical literacy, it's Griffith Observatory and its director, Ed Crow. Ed?
Such a heartbreak that the bottle does.
Hold on.
Let me just check. How's the volume? Is that okay? I have props here, so forgive me. Obviously, thank you, Sam, and thanks to all of you here. Certainly, I am cheered and honored to be among so many members of the Hale family, and I can't tell you how remarkable and unanticipated the pleasure is of being at an event where I'm also consuming Hale family wine. This is extraordinary. It's not what I ever was led to expect would happen from graduate school. So the Hale name is, of course, profoundly significant in astronomy and science, and also, for that matter, in the very fabric of Southern California. And a hint of Hale's broad imprint upon Southern California is evident in a letter written to him in 1923 by Dr. Robert Freeman, who was the minister of Pasadena Presbyterian Church. And it echoes some of the things that you all already know, but I think are worth punctuating once more. So Freeman wrote to Hale, "Mount Wilson is a synonym for your name. The development of the Institute of Technology," that's Caltech, obviously, "is known to have been your dream. The Huntington Library is credited to you, though it was given by a millionaire. All of these incredibly visionary and demonstrably significant enterprises were driven by Hale. And the 200-inch Palomar Hale telescope isn't even in the mix yet when you talk about those things." Hale was, of course, an astronomer. And in fact, I don't know of anyone who had more individual impact on the infrastructure of American astronomy than George Ellery Hale. And I think Wendy Friedman is going to confirm that in spades tomorrow. That said, there are other aspects of Hale's astronomical commitment that I think are not so well known. Hale not only built observatories and made astronomical discoveries, he was authentically invested in astronomy's entire heritage, including its earliest enterprises. One of his books is my copy. I have it here, brought it from home, Beyond the Milky Way, was published by Scribner's in 1926, and it includes an article titled, very exotically, "The Oriental Ancestry of the Telescope." And this describes ancient Egyptian astronomical instrument, an ancient instrument that was acquired by Hale's friend, the renowned Egyptologist James Breasted. Now, I'm astounded that Hale and Breasted were friends. That alone would be enough. But then Hale is writing about this artifact that Breasted encountered that has an astronomical dimension. And that account that Hale writes is part of a very respectable account of ancient Egyptian astronomy. And again, I knew of Breasted's stature in Egyptology. I remember being very surprised when I first learned that he and Hale were friends. And it was just indicative of the many different areas in which George Ellery Hale was active and interested. And Hale's discussion on ancient astronomy in this book would be regarded as particularly remarkable at any time. But at that time, in 1926, hardly anybody wrote substantively and authoritatively about Egyptian astronomy, and certainly not for the general reader. But George Ellery Hale was out there with that. The rest of that article, by the way, deals with Mesopotamia, Greece, China, Central Asia, and Tycho Brahe, and reflects an authentic dedication to astronomy's past. The article is, of course, a minor element in George Ellery Hale's career. Resonates with me, but it's still a minor element, and it demonstrates the breadth of his interests and his attraction to the human dimension of science. Very few people can say, of course, that they built the world's largest telescope. Hale did it over and over again. And his 40-inch Yerkes telescope is the largest refractor that was ever commissioned. It's a monster. Discoveries by Hale's 3 precedent-shattering observatories, Yerkes, of course, in Wisconsin, Mount Wilson, and Palomar in California, just added more knowledge to the universe, of course. At least one of them, as you know, completely changed the way people think about the universe. And that is important because the way people think about the universe affects how they behave. This isn't just about knowledge. It's about perspective. It's about what we do next. And our understanding of the universe has a very real effect on those decisions. Edwin Hubble's discovery of the expanding universe with Hale's 100-inch Mount Wilson telescope, of course, is not then just a watershed in astronomy's history. It's a watershed in intellectual history of all of us for all time as a species. It's a remarkable thing that happened. And I don't think we've yet absorbed the real impact. We're still in the midst of adapting to those discoveries. The 100-inch telescope turned what had been a static universe into an evolving cosmos. And ultimately that discovery does affect everything. The telescope is that important. That telescope on Mount Wilson is that important. I don't think this is a healthy suggestion, but I do believe it ought to be a national monument, for gosh sakes. The 100-inch at least has appeared on a United States postage stamp. So that at least is good. Now, this is all very lofty, but I would like to make it personal. I was born in Chicago. I get the sense that there are a lot of Chicago people. Yeah. All right. By the time I was 8, I decided to become an astronomer. Books were responsible for this, and the other planetarium in Chicago reinforced the notion. This is one of the first publications I encountered and read and collected. It's called Beyond the Solar System. It's written by Bertha Morris Parker of the University of Chicago. It was checked for accuracy by George Van Biesbroek at Yerkes Observatory, Hale's first major observatory. And it's graced with a panoramic cover. I know it's difficult to see in the light and out at the distance, but let me assure you, it's phenomenal what's on that cover. It's the Yerkes 40-inch refractor, the largest refractor ever built and operated. Seems even more enormous than it is on the book. And of course, it is enormous. Well, that cover, when I was a kid, didn't tell me how telescopes work. It did tell me they are majestic. And even though I had no idea at the time that there was somebody named George Ellery Hale, the monumentality of that work reached far beyond Yerkes Observatory and made astronomy seem grand. Encounters with the legacy of George Ellery Hale continued for me, even though Hale had passed 6 years before I was born. But here's another example. It's called Stars, the Golden Nature Guide, first published in 1941. Hale's 200-inch reflector on Palomar Mountain not only illustrates the passage on telescopes in this book, but also commands its own page as the largest telescope, which of course it was at its time. The text is informative, but the picture is what grabs the heart. The view of this huge, modern architecture dome open to the night sky, it was the biggest telescope on Earth at the time, and everything about it was distinctive. And for that reason, it started showing up everywhere as the iconic image of an astronomical observatory, more or less starting in the 1950s. It showed up in comic books from Casper the Ghost to Spacebusters, in movies like Invaders from Mars, which I still love, in newspaper cartoons and on postcards. And like the 100-inch telescope on Mount Wilson, the Palomar 200-inch telescope has also been commemorated, at least the dome, on a US postage stamp. So that's good. For a kid like me in Chicago, in the 1950s, Palomar was the classic observatory. It was also exotic because it is in California. And California, to anybody in Chicago, you know, that's exotic. That sensibility was reinforced by my mother's Aunt Flossie, who lived in San Diego. Now, although I had never met her and never traveled to California, she reliably sent me birthday and Christmas presents from California. And she, knowing I was dedicated to astronomy, one year sent me a piece of Palomar Mountain. It was a Palomar Observatory roadside souvenir, a section of a tree branch cut to be like a little shelf that would hold with glue a rock from Palomar Mountain. And the background was like those decals that they used to put on cars when you traveled in the 40s and the 50s of the Palomar Observatory dome. I treasured that. Somehow I lost it in the transfer to California from Chicago when my parents moved here. I have regretted the loss ever since. And if anybody ever sees one of those, you know, just I'll put it on the cover of the Griffith Observer, I guarantee. Well, none of this is really significant, of course. It's all just personal. But it all shows, I think, how George Ellery Hale's California observatories created some of the California mystique and how those observatories became emblems of American astronomy and science for the United States and for the entire world. Hale's impact on public astronomy is, however, far deeper than these images of popular culture that I've invoked here. George Ellery Hale and his observatories had a lot to do with making Griffith Observatory the most visited public observatory on the planet. Without Hale, it's actually hard to imagine that Griffith J. Griffith ever would have been inspired to envision and fund the construction of Griffith Observatory. Without Hale, it's unlikely that Griffith Observatory would look like it does and work like it does. This all begins with Colonel Griffith. He was a Los Angeles landowner, an entrepreneur, and Griffith was interested in a lot of things, including astronomy, and he was given a chance to visit Mount Wilson Observatory. And he had a chance also to look through the 60-inch reflector at the time. And it was the largest telescope in the world at that time. It was a high-end research telescope that accommodated instruments and wasn't the kind of thing in which to which you would put your eyeball. But Griffith had the chance to do that. The experience affected him profoundly. After seeing Saturn dramatically magnified by the 60-inch reflector, Griffith is quoted to have said, "If all mankind could look through that telescope, it would change the world." Well, all mankind couldn't look through that telescope. You know, it was a research observatory on top of Mount Wilson. But Griffith then decided that he should finance an observatory that could accommodate the world. And you can hear in his remark that he is interested in astronomy, but he's interested in something else as well. He's interested in the personal transformation that occurs in each and every individual when they make eyeball contact with the universe. And he wanted to multiply that as much as he could. So Griffith then developed a detailed plan for Griffith Observatory in Griffith Park and established principles that drive its operation and its fundamental elements that are required to allow it to perform in the way that he imagined. Colonel Griffith then was acquainted with Hale, and Griffith Observatory happened because Griffith experienced a Hale telescope in person. And it is hard to imagine Los Angeles without Griffith Observatory. It goes to George Ellery Hale. But wait, there's more. George Ellery Hale hired Russell W. Porter, an engineer, artist, and a telescope maker, and of course, an Arctic explorer, to develop the visualizations and technical support for the design of the 200-inch telescope coming to Palomar Mountain. But in 1931, Hale loaned Porter to the Griffith Observatory project, which was headed toward architectural design. Much of what Griffith Observatory became, its distinctive appearance, its content, and its operation, follows Porter's suggestions, proposals, and designs. And so it's fair to say that George Ellery Hale, through Porter, helped create Griffith Observatory as a landmark and as a public resource. Now, I am here tonight in admiration of George Ellery Hale, but I am here tonight in admiration of Mount Wilson Observatory and Sam Hale and the family's effort to keep this thing alive and as a monument and a testimony for the future. It's not just a structure of history. It is a living, breathing part of all of us. George Ellery Hale's accumulated impact on astronomical imagination, it now totals something like 80 million people who have come to Griffith Observatory. And so that way, Hale forged an image of Southern California for the rest of the world. Griffith Observatory has returned the favor. It acknowledges the Hale telescopes with a sightline to Mount Wilson and with the observatory's Observing in California exhibit, which demonstrates that Southern California was the Alexandria of astronomy in the beginning of the 20th century. And George Hale was at the center of astronomy. That includes, of course, at the observatory, a working model of the 200-inch telescope. And we're very proud to say the central core of the 200-inch mirror. I think Palomar still wants that, but we've got it for the public at Griffith. And also with a starring appearance of the 100-inch Mount Wilson reflector, the telescope that revealed just how extraordinary and unexpected the real universe is. A starring role in Griffith Observatory centered in the Universe Planetarium show. So George Ellery Hale not only transformed American astronomy, that's pretty evident. He also had a remarkable influence on American culture. He should be on a postage stamp. Thanks very much.
They don't get any better than Ed Krupp, I'll tell you. Thank you, Ed. What a friend of Mount Wilson. Sean James asked me as we were coming in from looking at the prison, Dan Coney's prison, our director, Dan Coney, who a few years ago, I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly how it happened. We got a loan, or maybe as a prospective buyer of the prison, we got a opportunity to put it up on top of the 150-foot solar tower. And Dan, with his smartphone, can train it all over Southern California. And it is a wonderful beacon for Mount Wilson. And it's a prism. And what does it do? It breaks down the elements of the sun. George Hale's star. So. Thank you, Dan. Now, I'm starting to talk about Sean James, a Oregon cousin, a Scherer cousin, and he wanted to say a few words just about this event and our future. Sean?
So this is entirely unplanned, but I suppose that's how inspiration works when it comes to you. I should have thought far enough ahead to realize that I may be following someone like Dr. Krupp. Gets a little bit more intimidating after that. Say thank you for coming out and giving your time to our family. Just reading the agenda of what was happening tonight and the whole weekend and the people that were coming out to say things and give their time. I just felt compelled to come up here and talk for a moment because I was with my cousin Ben James, 3 years ago when we came down, and I was right there with Ben, as Gavin was saying earlier, that I knew from my grandmother, who was George Ellery's granddaughter. He's my great-great-grandfather. There's a chart. I knew that he had done amazing things in astronomy and with telescopes. but I had no idea the scope of what he did. And when we came down here 3 years ago, I met up with Sam and Sylvia. We had breakfast halfway out to Santa Barbara somewhere. I don't remember that part, but I remember talking to the two of them. And we, the majority of the time, talked about how great it would be to have an event like this and get people in the family together and share the legacy and the heritage that we all have, because of how inspiring it is and what it does to your mind, the things that it makes you think about. The reason I wanted to take a moment to say a few words, and I appreciate Sam giving me the opportunity, is that there are so many of us here tonight, but when you look at the chart at the same time, there are a lot of us that aren't. There are a lot of us in the younger generations that aren't here this evening or are here, but Barrett, Ben's son, he's not going to remember this. You got to bring him back. We need to, as Hale descendants, expose everyone we know, including our own family, to this legacy and the inspiration that it provides. Because, as Dr. Krupp said, a quote from Griffith, turns out it was fortuitous that I followed you, because I got to hear that quote. If all mankind could look through this telescope, it would change the world. And it really could, if everybody gets that opportunity. And our family, we need to do that for the younger generations. Get them exposed to it. Let them see it. Even if they decide that that's not what they want to do, give them the opportunity to know what George Ellery did. And even before him, I feel like we've talked about it, but maybe not enough. William Hale, before him, the Reliance building, what they did for skyscrapers and elevators, I don't feel like I know enough about that, but it was before George Ellery that our family was thinking beyond what was possible currently and just going with easy things. As George Ellery said, make no small plans. Let's give future generations the opportunity to decide what plans they want to make, and make no small plans if those are the no small plans that they want to make. Because if we don't, it's all on Gavin.
All right, I want to direct your attention now to a very delightful part of the evening, and that's George's birthday cake there. And if we could get the cake cut. Yeah. That would be great. Right now. Yeah. Picture, yeah. All right. Thank you. What great voices. I would just like to wrap up the evening with a couple of thoughts. June was a very important month in George Ellery Hale's life. First of all, he was born June the 29th, just 3 days ago. It was June 1903 when he came to Mount Wilson. And Tom, that picture you have of him with the binoculars looking out, that was taken when he came to Mount Wilson, scouting the surroundings. And it was June of 1907 when George Ellery Hale discovered magnetic fields in sunspots, one of his great and seminal discoveries. He was, I think we know by now he was a visionary. I think that's clear from the last day and a half. His father, William Ellery Hale, was truly a visionary. Did he have a vision of Chicago? I don't know. But he created a new Chicago. Somebody today mentioned, I forget who it was, about there are no small plans in Chicago. It's a buzzing town. And he was one of two people, according to Louis Sullivan, the great Chicago architect, who created the skyscraper and the high rises and rebuilt Chicago from the ashes with the help of the elevator. And a man named Daniel Burnham. And I'm going to read you that quote because it is so stirring. Make no little plans. My glasses are terrible. Make no little plans. These other glasses. This is a stand-in pair. They don't work. Anyway, we know what he said. Make no small plans because they don't stir the hearts of men. And little ones probably won't be realized anyway. And George Ellery, William Ellery, in their own way, were visionaries. My question is, how are we going to be visionaries? What is going to be our contribution to the legacy that they left us? And I'm going to submit that as Dr. Krupp said, there are magnificent monuments up there, but they're more than structures of steel and glass. And you said it's about humanity. And George Hale understood humanity. And our mission at Mount Wilson now, the Mount Wilson Institute, manage the Mount Wilson Observatory, is to spread the scientific literacy that Griffith is spreading, that Hale inspired Colonel Griffith to create the most visited observatory in the world, because it is through the spreading of scientific literacy that we are going to promote real equity in this society. We have to educate kids, we have to stimulate kids, and that's what we're doing on Mount Wilson today. This is our vision. This is our vision to bring children at those ages where they're most susceptible to inspiration and excitement about the future and about what their lives can be. Todd Mason mentioned over at the Hale Solar Lab about that woman who had viewed the journey to Palomar and talked about how it inspired her to a career in science. I was at the centennial of the 100-inch telescope 5 years ago. And this woman came up to me and said, Mr. Hale, I was here in this dome I think she said about 50 years prior. She said, I was so inspired. I was so struck by what this place is and what it meant that I have had a life in science. And said, this is the first time in 50 years I've been back here, but I had to come back to thank Mount Wilson, to thank what is here for what my life is meant to be. We hear story after story about that. We are now engaged in what's called STEM education. It is bringing kids to the mountain. It is from underserved areas. All of a sudden we're exploding with opportunities to bring children to Mount Wilson. Just this summer, we had 40 kids come down from San Luis Obispo on a program from an online school up there. The same group just before the COVID sent 4 people. All of a sudden, it's spreading. We had a group of autistic kids up there, Tom was telling me. Just a couple of days ago, we were talking about it. He said these 12 autistic kids were so incredible when they were exposed to just what Ed is talking about. We're talking about this reaches people, this reaches humanity. And it's more than just science. And that's what our mission is to bring those children to Mount Wilson. And it is also to restore science there. We are restoring science. We are doing science again there. We are making improvements in the instruments. And that is so exciting. And Dan Coney, again, 5 years ago, he headed up a program. We're expanding into the arts. Every month of our season, we have concerts in the 100-inch dome, magnificent concerts that are selling out now. People love the absolute music of the spheres. The acoustics in that 100-inch dome are beyond belief. Tomorrow, you're going to be able to attend one of our lectures, which is part of our season. Every month, we have a lecture with a notable astronomer, astrophysicist, or a scientist from some discipline come and talk to us, as we will tomorrow night. We're expanding our reach. And the thing that we have, maybe even over Griffith, is how many million people open their front door every morning, and there's Mount Wilson, there's Dan's prism. People can see it. And we in turn can turn around and reach them and make them aware of what it is we're doing there. So that is our mission. And I think that it is going to help with what Colonel Griffith saw as touching people's humanity. And that's what Edwin Hubble did when he discovered that we're not in a static universe. And we're going to learn so much more about this universe. We're going to learn more about the universe tomorrow night, listening to Wendy Friedman, who next month is going to be one of the first people on the James Webb telescope, and it's going to tell us about it. Now talk about excitement and talk about vision of the future, and we're going to learn more about ourselves. Anyway, how are we going to do this? 12 years ago, we initiated what we called the Second Century Campaign. Stefanos Palazoides and Liz Mole, their firm, created some visualizations, some sketches of what was going to be a large visitor center and some adjacent buildings. But then we had the Great financial crisis, 2008, 2009. And we were facing some challenging times financially after that. Well, I'm here to tell you that we're going to start that project again. Liz and Stefano have created drawings, plans. You're going to see them up on the mountain tomorrow when we're up at the 100-inch dome. And we are going to start a project. First of all, we're going to improve the bathrooms. We have to build bathrooms up there. Not very romantic, but when you have a whole bunch of kids up there, there's only so many trees you can get behind to pee. Yeah. And so we're going to do that. We're going to improve our auditorium where you're going to be tomorrow night to hear Wendy Friedman's lecture. We're going to upgrade the cafe to bring more people up there to enjoy the beauty of the mountain and dine. We're going to improve the monastery, a place where you're going to have dinner tomorrow night, the place where the astronomers would come, socialize, dine, relax when they were staying overnight on the mountain. An absolutely wonderful place. And we're going to start this project, and you're going to see the renderings tomorrow, which I think will excite you. And one other thing that we're doing is 3 years ago, again before the COVID struck, our friend Scott Roberts, who you can't see right now, president of Explore Scientific, and a wonderful friend of Mount Wilson Observatory, came to me with an idea about starting what we are now calling the Alliance of Historic Observatories. And with Scott's help, we brought together Mount Wilson, Palomar, Yerkes, Lick, Lowell, and the new Vatican Observatory in Arizona as the initial group to form this organization. And we're going to work together to leverage each other's opportunities, talents, our successes, help each other where we have our challenges, because we all face the same kind of issues about surviving in these times and what we can do to serve mankind. And the interesting thing, 3 years ago, around that time, I visited the Royal Observatory in Greenwich in London. I also went to the Einstein Tower in Potsdam, the astrophysical center there. And I went to Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome, where the Vatican Observatory is now. And the Vatican has been for hundreds of years a great backer of and a cutting edge people in astronomy. They're all fascinated by this idea of coming together to leverage each other's talents and opportunities. We have a friend in Santa Barbara named Wayne Rosing. Wayne Rosing developed a place called Las Cumbres Observatories. It's 9 observatories around the world that can follow an object in the sky on a 24-hour basis as the world turns. He has linked all these places together with computers. What we're going to do is take some of these old observatories, like we had an inquiry recently from Perth, Australia, from the Western, I think it's a Western Australian Observatory. They heard about this AHO, they want to join. We just heard last week that the Royal Observatory is meeting with an Irish observatory and a Scottish observatory later this year to talk, how can these old observatories that have so much to give, so much great optics, so much great history, such a following, how can they come together and help one another? Well, this is what we're going to develop. And with this AHO that we're doing with Wayne's technology, just think about how we can link up all these observatories around the world. I mean, it's going to be incredible. And science is going to be led in this group by Mount Wilson, by the Mount Wilson Observatory. So we have a lustrous future. And while we celebrate the visionaries of the past, we have to realize, as Sean said, as Gavin has said, you know, we're the visionaries of the future, and we have to make it happen. I don't know if it was Tom, you read the piece from Harper's Magazine about that George Hale wrote in, I think it was November of 1928. And you were right, he aimed that at the Rockefeller Advisory Board. And that was such a stirring, imaginative, visionary piece, and realize that from ground zero, within 5 years, they were pouring the 200-inch mirror in Corning, New York, from a standing start. And it was the inspiration of George Hale that made that happen. So I think we can say, and the thing that struck me about that, and this again is in Todd's Journey to Palomar film, one of the people interviewed said that that was the Apollo project of the 30s. And you think about it, and I think we all remember as kids seeing those movie reels of the pouring of the 100-inch or 200-inch mirror, the casting of it, the being loaded on the trains coming across the country. People lined up by the railroad tracks in Kansas watching this thing go by, and then arriving at Caltech and being moved into the building down here, and then being hauled up the mountain to Palomar. It was a national event. And in the 30s, 1932, when that pouring happened, I think we can rightly say we needed some inspiration. And I think we can say today, we really need some inspiration. And it is Mount Wilson and what we're going to do for children, what we're going to do for science, what we're going to do for observatories all over the world, that's going to really mean something. And so that is how we're going to accomplish this. You're going to see tomorrow, for those of you who haven't been to Mount Wilson, you're going to experience something. Yes, you'll see the science, but as Ed said about the humanity, about the spiritual, there is magic on that mountain. George Hale created something spiritual, intangible, and magical. And I want to close. I want to tell you a little story, if you'll bear with me for a moment. When I first got involved about 20 years ago on the board, and I did not know much about Mount Wilson and what was going on, but was invited because I had a catchy last name. I was at a meeting of the Pasadena Humane Society that I was involved with, and it was our annual meeting, and we're standing around on a veranda looking out. It looked out northeast at the San Gabriels, and I walked up to this fellow who was standing there by himself, just introduced myself and chat, and I said, "Hi, my name is Sam Hale," and he said, "How do you do? My name is Alan Sandage." And I said, "Sandage? Are you that Sandage? The astronomer Sandage?" He said, "Yes." He said, and he turns and points to Mount Wilson. "Are you that Hale?" That I was. Fast forward, he invites me to come to Santa Barbara Street to where the Carnegie Observatories are headquartered. He said, "Have you ever been there?" I said, "No." "Well, let me show you around." So we went and had a nice lunch, and he showed me all over. The last stop we made on this tour was the machine shop, where they were doing a lot of work on equipment that they were sending down to Chile for the observatories down there. Now, this was an incredibly emotional experience, and I get teary every time I've told this story, and I've told it for 20 years because it had such an impact on me. We walk into this place, he calls all of the workmen around. There were 7 or 8 machinists and carpenters and doing their thing. And he said, guys, come over here. There's somebody I want you to meet. And come over and said, this is George Hale's grandson. These guys looked at me. Said, Mr. Hale, they came up and shook my hand. I mean, I was dumbstruck how these people never met George Hale. He had died 60 years before. Nobody in that building ever knew George Hale. But as we walked away, Dr. Sandage said to me, this gets me every time. He said, your grandfather is alive in this building right now. And if we've learned anything about George Hale and what he did and what he meant, he is alive. And the Gavins and the Shawns and the Bens and all of you of the younger generations, we invite you to help us keep him alive, accelerate his vision. It's a different vision, just as George's was a different vision than his father, William. We have a slight turn in the path. But join us. Help us find our vision. Thanks. I think that's it. If anybody else has anything they want to say. All right, dessert time.